The lights flicker as the boy closes his eyes. He's seated in a metal chair inside a small room beneath a military base on Long Island. Wires trail from the chair to a row of instruments along the wall. A man in a lab coat watches the needles rise. Another writes without looking up. They tell the boy to focus, to picture something that isn't there. 1 meter drifts. Another spikes hard enough to draw attention. Someone tells him to keep going. Blood runs from his nose. His breathing grows shallow. The hum of the lights cuts out, and the room falls quiet except for the sound of equipment straining under its own load. Suddenly, an alarm goes off somewhere deeper in the base. This is the moment the story says the experiment slipped out of control. And if this sounds familiar, there's a reason for that. The reason this story feels familiar is because it left a mark. Before it entered popular culture, it existed as a set of stories tied to a military installation on the eastern edge of Long Island, a place that operated quietly during the Cold War, far from public view. Early versions of Stranger Things were developed under the working title Montauk, and the creators have acknowledged drawing inspiration from stories connected to that place. Before anyone was watching, Montauk was a real place on the eastern edge of Long Island. During the Cold War, Montauk Air Force Station stood overlooking the Atlantic as part of the country's early warning defense system. Access was restricted, details were limited, and silence filled the gaps. Over time, stories formed around that silence. They surfaced in interviews, in books, in accounts that were still being told years later. This episode isn't about a television show. It's about a story that existed long before anyone was watching. I'm your host, Robert Barber. Tonight, we're looking at a series of claims and reports tied to a Cold War military base on Long Island. Stories involving children, secret experiments, and events that were said to spiral out of control behind closed doors. Years later, these stories would help shape one of the most recognizable science fiction series of the modern era. This is the story of the Montauk Project. Let's get into it. The base sits at the edge of Long Island, where the land thins and the Atlantic takes over. From the road, it doesn't draw attention. Fences line the perimeter. Guard posts mark the entrances. Low buildings sit back from the highway, arranged with purpose rather than symmetry. A radar tower rises above everything else, visible for miles. Inside, the day is broken into shifts. Personnel arrive, check in, and move through designated areas. Equipment runs continuously. Screens glow in dimly lit rooms. Antennas track distant signals that never become visible to the people watching them. Radar operators sit facing wide circular displays, following slow sweeps as they pass again and again. Technicians adjust instruments, record readings, reset systems, and move on to the next task. The process repeats, shifts change, and the base continues operating. Access is controlled. Some doors open with a badge. Others require additional clearance. Some areas are clearly marked. Others aren't marked at all. People learn quickly where they're allowed to go and where they aren't. Beneath the surface buildings, corridors branch off into sections most personnel never enter. Rooms without windows. Rooms designed to house specialized equipment. Rooms built to contain sound and limit outside interference. The base was constructed to monitor distant threats, to detect activity before it reached the coast, to respond before anyone beyond the fences knew that there was a reason to respond. For the people assigned there, it's a posting, a responsibility, another place in a long chain of duty stations. For the town beyond the perimeter, it's a constant presence, familiar enough to be ignored, restricted enough to remain separate. The base doesn't explain itself. It doesn't have to. And for a long time, nothing about it seems unusual. The children don't arrive all at once. They come in small groups, scheduled around the base's normal operations. Some are brought by parents. Others are handed off by staff members who already know where they're going. They're told they're there to help. The explanation is kept simple. Tests, exercises, participation in a government study. Nothing that sounds dangerous. Nothing that sounds permanent. The rooms they're taken into are smaller than the rest of the base. Windowless, square, fluorescent lights set into the ceiling. A single chair bolted to the floor at the center of the room. A table against the wall holding equipment laid out in neat rows. Each child is seated and asked not to move. Electrodes are placed along the scalp. Wires run from contact points down the chair frame and into a bank of machines mounted along the wall. Straps are adjusted across the arms and waist, tight enough to keep posture ready, but not too tight as to restrict breathing. Instructions are given at eye level. Close your eyes. Breathe normally. Picture what you're told to picture. At first, the sessions are short. The children are asked to imagine simple shapes. A square, a line, a point of light. Staff members watch needles trace faint movements across paper. Others monitor screens that update in slow, steady increments. Some children fidget. Some open their eyes. Some ask questions. Others are still. Those children are asked back. Over time, the session grows longer. The shapes become more complex. The focus periods extend. Breaks are spaced farther apart. A cup of water is offered between rounds. Aspirin is kept on the table, already unwrapped. Headaches are noted. Fatigue is recorded. When a nosebleed starts, a technician hands over gauze and waits for it to stop before continuing. Parents are told their children are responding well. They're told progress is being made. Schedules are adjusted. Sessions repeat. Children return again and again, walking the same corridors, sitting in the same chairs, feeling the same pressure points against their skin. For the staff, it becomes procedure. For the children, it becomes routine. And nothing about it feels like a single moment. It feels like something is building. The sessions begin to change. They last longer now. The chairs feel harder by the end. The straps press into skin that's already sore from holding the same position. The instructions stay calm and precise. The children are told to focus and hold the image steady. When it fades, they're told to bring it back. When they shift in the chair, they're reminded to stay still. Sweat forms along the hairline beneath the electrodes. Muscles in the neck tighten as the children try to keep their heads from moving. The machines respond in small ways at first. Needles climb slightly higher on the paper rolls. Lines on the screens thicken. A technician adjusts a dial and waits for the readings to settle before continuing. The exercises become more demanding. The children are asked to concentrate for longer stretches of time. The images they're given become more detailed. They're told to hold them in place without letting their focus drift. Some complain of pressure behind the eyes. Others describe a ringing sound that doesn't stop when they open them. A few grow nauseated and are escorted out. Their chairs are wiped down before the next session begins. Those children don't return. The others do. Sessions are scheduled closer together. The same faces appear in the room again and again. During one session, a reading jumps without warning. A needle tears sharply across the paper. A monitor flickers, then steadies. Connections are checked. Output is adjusted. The session continues. It happens again. Readings climb and fall without matching the controls. The hum of the equipment deepens as more power is drawn into the system. Someone orders the level reduced. Someone else signals to keep going. The children's breathing changes. Shoulders tense against the straps. Fingers curl as they try to maintain focus. When the session finally ends, the room doesn't feel the same as it did when it began. The equipment still runs, the lights remain on. Paper rolls are torn free and stacked on the table. One by one, the machines are powered down and the needles fall back to zero. The children are unstrapped and let out without discussion. The next session is scheduled anyway. The session begins like the others. The child is seated. The straps are secured. Electrodes are checked and pressed back into place where the skin has already grown tender. The equipment is powered on. Paper feeds through the rollers. The instructions are familiar. Focus. Hold the image. Don't let it drift. At first, the readings move within the same narrow range they've settled into over the past few sessions. A technician watches the meters and makes a small adjustment to the output. Then, one of the needles jumps. It doesn't drift, it snaps upward, hard enough to tear the paper. A second meter follows. A warning light flashes on a panel near the wall. Someone calls out the reading. Another technician steps closer to the machine and checks the connections. The child is told to keep concentrating. The straps are tightened slightly to steady their posture. The readings climb again. The hum of the equipment deepens as more power is drawn into the system. The lights overhead flicker once, then hold. A low vibration moves through the chair frame. An alarm sounds in the hallway outside the room. The child's breathing becomes uneven. Their jaw locks. Blood runs from the nose down towards the corner of the mouth. Gauze is pressed into place without stopping the session. The meter spikes together now. A technician reaches for controls and pulls back on the output. The readings don't respond. Another hand hits the cutoff switch. Nothing happens. The vibration grows stronger. Loose items on the table begin to shift. Then one of the overhead lights goes dark. A voice over the intercom orders a shutdown. The machines continue running. Someone yanks the power feed at the wall. The lights go out. The paper stops moving. But the needles don't fall. They remain pinned where they peaked, frozen against the upper limits of the gauges even as the room goes dark. No one touches the equipment. After several seconds, someone says to release the straps. The child slumps forward as they're lifted from the chair. The electrodes are pulled free and dropped onto the table, still warm to the touch. In the hallway, doors are closing. Footsteps move quickly in both directions. That session doesn't resume. The response happens quickly. Doors that were normally left open are closed, and access badges stop working in certain corridors without warning. Guards are posted in areas that had never required them before, and movement through the lower levels becomes restricted overnight. Inside those sections, equipment is shut down in stages. Some rooms are powered off entirely, while others are left exactly as they were, with lights still on and machines running without anyone assigned to them. The children are removed from the schedule. Parents are contacted and told the sessions have ended. The explanation is brief and doesn't invite questions. Pickup times are arranged, paperwork is signed, and the children are escorted out through side exits rather than the main doors. Some of them ask why they won't be coming back. No one answers. Staff members who were present during the final sessions are reassigned. A few are moved to different parts of the base. Others are sent off-site. Several are instructed to take leave without being told how long it'll last. Conversations begin to change. People lower their voices. Discussions stop when someone unfamiliar enters the room. Notes that were kept openly on desks are gathered up and removed. Paper rolls from the machines are boxed and taken away during the night. When personnel return the next morning, the rooms appear unchanged, but the materials that once filled them are gone. In the lower corridors, warning lights remain active even after the power has been cut. A vibration can still be felt in the floor beneath certain rooms, faint but persistent. Maintenance crews are sent in to investigate, but they don't stay long. One technician refuses to re-enter a room after a door closes behind him without being touched. Another reports that equipment cycled on and off even though it had been disconnected from power. Both incidents are written down and filed. Neither is discussed again. Orders are issued to seal specific sections of the base. New locks are installed. Signs appear without explanation. The corridors beyond them fall out of use, and no effort is made to repurpose the space. Above ground, the base continues operating as it always has. Radar sweeps the sky, shifts change. From the outside, nothing appears different. But the areas tied to the sessions are avoided. Whatever happened there is not explained to the people who remain. It's simply left behind. When the sessions end, there is no announcement. The base continues operating and the routines on the surface remain unchanged. Personnel rotate in and out. New assignments take the place of old ones. The sealed corridors remain closed, and no one is told when or if they will reopen. The children return home. They go back to school. They rejoin their families. On the outside, their lives resume a familiar shape. Parents are told there's nothing to worry about and no follow-up appointments are scheduled. Some of the children complain of lingering headaches. Others have trouble sleeping. A few describe vivid dreams that don't fade when they wake up. Doctors are consulted, but no clear cause is found, and the symptoms are treated individually rather than as a part of a larger pattern. Over time, the complaints become harder to talk about. The children grow older, details blur, memories lose their edges. What once felt immediate becomes difficult to explain, even to themselves. Inside the base, the people who were present during the sessions are careful about what they say. Some transfer out within months. Others finish their assignments and never return. A few stay on, working in areas far removed from the lower levels. Years later, fragments of the story begin to surface. They appear in interviews, in unpublished manuscripts, in conversations that start carefully and end without conclusions. Accounts differ in timing and detail, but certain elements repeat often enough to stand out. There's always a base. There are always children. And there's always a moment when something changes, followed by a period of silence. No official report is ever released. No explanation is offered. The sealed areas are never publicly discussed. What remains is a collection of memories that don't quite fit together, passed from person to person without ever settling into a single version. Today, the base is a public park. Families visit on weekends. People walk their dogs along paths that once led to restricted buildings. Children play in open fields where fences used to stand. Most visitors don't notice anything unusual, but locals will tell you there are still areas they avoid, even now. Places where nothing is marked, but no one stays for very long. And that's how the story survives. Not as a warning or a legend, just something people learn to avoid. Up to this point, you've heard the story the way it's usually told, as a sequence of events remembered and repeated by the people who claim to be closest to it. This is where we step back and talk about what we can actually trace, what's disputed, and why this story refuses to settle. First, the place itself. Montauk Air Force Station was real. It operated on the eastern tip of Long Island during the Cold War as part of the country's radar and early warning defense system. The base existed. It was restricted, and much of what happened there was not public knowledge at the time. That part isn't in question. Where things become less clear is what took place beyond the base's documented mission. There are no official records confirming experiments involving children, psychic research, or mind control programs conducted at Montauk. No declassified files describe anything like the sessions you just heard. Instead, most of the detailed claims trace back to a small number of individuals who came forward years later. Two names appear more often than any others: Preston Nichols and Al Bielek. Nichols claimed he worked at the base as an engineer and became involved in projects that went far beyond radar and communications. Bielek claimed first-hand involvement in secret programs and said his memories were suppressed and later recovered. Their accounts describe experiments involving psychological manipulation, advanced technology, and the use of children as test subjects. Those claims are extraordinary, and they're not supported by any independent documentation. There are no payroll records, service files, or corroborating witnesses that place either man in the roles they describe during the periods in question. Timelines shift between the versions of their stories. Details change as their accounts are retold. That doesn't automatically mean the story was invented. It means it rests almost entirely on personal testimony. And that's where Montauk becomes complicated. During the Cold War, the U.S. government did conduct real psychological and behavioral research under conditions of secrecy. Programs like MK Ultra are now well documented, and they involved unethical testing, limited oversight, and long-term harm to participants. So when people hear stories like Montauk, they don't emerge in a vacuum. They attach themselves to a historical context where secrecy and abuse did happen. And it's that context that gives this story weight, even when specific claims can't be verified. It's also worth mentioning that Montauk is associated with another story entirely. In 2008, a decomposing animal washed ashore nearby and quickly became known online as the Montauk Monster. Photos circulated widely, and speculation followed just as quickly. There's no credible connection between that incident and the Montauk Project claims, but its sudden rise shows how easily strange stories attach themselves to places that already carry a sense of secrecy and unease. It's also why Montauk persists. Because even if the experiments described here didn't happen as told, the conditions that made people believe they could have happened were very real. A remote base, restricted access, Cold War urgency, and a public kept at a distance. Over time, those ingredients produced a story that grew larger than any single account. One that inspired books, documentaries, and eventually fictionalized versions that reached a global audience, including a television series that borrowed the atmosphere, the isolation, and the idea that something was done behind closed doors that never fully went away. That doesn't make the story true, but it does explain why it continues to circulate and why it still unsettles people decades later. Because Montauk isn't just about what may or may not have happened at one base. It's about how much power people were willing to give institutions during a time of fear, and how little visibility they had into what was being done in their name. That's the part of this story that's hardest to ignore. Montauk is unusual because it never settles into a single story. It becomes a place where different explanations gather and overlap without ever fully agreeing. A military base closes. Time passes. Nothing official ever replaces the explanation that was never given. Over the years, that absence starts to do its own work. What remains isn't one clear account, but a collection of claims that refuse to line up neatly. Some are detailed. Others shift depending on who's telling them. Many feel shaped by memory as much as by fact. And yet, they all keep circling the same location. That pull is hard to ignore. It's why this story didn't stay confined to interviews and self-published books. It's why it eventually moved into popular culture. When the creators of Stranger Things went looking for inspiration, they didn't invent a place like Montauk. They borrowed the atmosphere around it, the isolation, the secrecy, the sense that something important happened out of view and was never fully accounted for. Once that happened, the story took on a second life. Montauk stopped being just a set of claims and became a reference point, a shorthand for a certain kind of unease. Not monsters or spectacle, but institutions operating beyond public scrutiny and the long shadow that kind of power can leave behind. It's also worth pausing on the people at the center of these stories, not as characters, but as children who were brought into a place they didn't understand and told to trust the adults around them. Imagine being asked to sit still, follow instructions, and never being told why. Imagine leaving and being expected to return to a normal life without anyone ever explaining what you were part of. That shift into fiction didn't bring closure. It allowed the questions to keep circulating, even as the original details grew harder to pin down. Today, Montauk looks ordinary. People visit. They take photos. They move through spaces that once served a very different purpose. But stories don't disappear just because a place becomes accessible. They linger where explanations never arrived and where silence filled the gap instead. And sometimes that's enough to keep people uneasy long after the buildings are gone. This has been State of the Unknown. Montauk doesn't leave us with answers. It leaves us with a place where explanations never arrived and a story that learned how to survive without them. Some locations fade once their purpose ends. Others take on a second life, shaped by what people remember, what they repeat, and what no one ever cleared up. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leaving a rating or review is one of the best ways to support the show and to help new listeners find it. It only takes a moment, and it helps more than you might think. And if you have a story you think belongs here, you can reach me anytime at stateoftheunknown.com/contact. Until next time, stay curious, stay unsettled, and remember, some places don't need fences to keep their secrets.